What's up everybody, Alex here, and welcome to this Dota Underlords Season 1 build guide for Spirit Mages. Now this build is very beginner friendly, and it's one of my favorite builds because it is relatively straightforward, though there is a lot of nuance to it, especially in the early game when you're starting off, and in the late game with item selection as well. So this guide is going to step you through the early game, the mid game, and the end game with some key points as to how you can itemize these heroes for maximum effect. So you're looking at the complete guide right now, the complete build I should say right now. There's a few considerations you need to make going into the early game. Right now we're running Hobgen. I will talk to you about the potential for Joel as well, but let's get started with the discussion of the early game. In the early game, I would recommend that you corner comp with someone like Hobgen. It helps to protect him, especially if you're running Friendly Fire Hobgen, because Friendly Fire tends to be cast really late in the fight, and if he goes down early, well, you don't get that benefit. Of course, he's going to be using Implosion, which benefits from the mage bonus. Now, with that being said, you want to position your units so that Earth Spirit's up front. Earth Spirit has a lot of health and a lot of armor. He is your primary tank. You need to have Razor on the edge here because his radial cast is not effective if you have him in a corner. So it's very important you have him as centralized as possible. You can even shift one if you wish. You can do something like this. This is totally acceptable as well. It helps to maximize Razor's damage potential as well. It's totally up to you. Hobgen needs to be protected, however, because without friendly fire, you're really reducing the amount of damage you're capable of doing. Now, you are running Storm Spirit and Morphling. You're putting, someone like Crystal Maiden in for Morphling first, and you take out Maiden for Morphling. With this here, what you got is you have, these mages, which you intend to run for most of the game. You have the 3 mage bonus, you have 2 primordials, and you have the 3 spirits. Now, early in the game, if you only have a 1-star Ember Spirit, you're going to have to put them up front with the Earth Spirit, because what's going to happen is Earth Spirit's going to cast first, and then Storm Spirit's going to cast, and you're going to be waiting on Ember. Because he doesn't get a lot of damage when he's in the back line, he's basically relying on his auto attack damage to generate his mana. If you have him up here, he's going to get poked enough that he's going to cast more or less in line with these 3 to get the Delta Slam. So that is very important with Ember Spirit. Once he's at 2 stars, he tends to do enough damage that he can cast in line with these guys, but don't be afraid to put him up front if you need him to get an earlier cast, because the Delta Slam is absolutely required in this build. Now, I have Shadow Fiend here. He is your ideal 6th unit. He was the one that you'd want to put in as a 6th unit if you can. You could even position them something like this. If you wish, I would actually put Razor here because his cast is a lot quicker, whereas Shadow Fiend has a bit of a build-up before he casts, which could cause him to die before he actually does his cast at all. But it is very important you have Razor instead of Shadow Fiend first. You might be tempted to run Shadow Fiend first, but if you do that, you actually lose the 35% mage bonus without having Razor. So the result of that is Shadow Fiend will actually do less damage than Razor at the same level because of the 35% bonus being applied, and that's going to be applied to Storm Spirit and the Morphling as well, and the Earth Spirit and all of Hobgen's abilities. So Razor is more valuable than Shadow Fiend when you only have 5 units on board, but Shadow Fiend is an ideal 6th unit to come into play in the early game. I also mentioned that Joel was an option as well. The way you'd want to position Joel is you'd want him to be in the center, and you'd want your ranged damage dealers to be around him here. In the very early game, you're actually going to put Ember Spirit on this side of him as well. The primary reason for this is because Joel gets additional armor based on who's around him. He gets 5 armor for every adjacent unit, enemy or foe. So you want everyone to kind of be huddled around him because it really increases his armor substantially, and you can imagine that the enemy will likely be in roughly this area as well. Ember Spirit, it's really, you could keep him at the back if he's 2-star, but if he's 1-star, he has to be up here with Joel. That's going to allow him to cast in line with the other spirits in order to do a Delta Slam. And remember, you also want to keep the enemy in the center here for the greater effectiveness of your Delta Slam. Joel, especially aggressive tank Joel, is a good option for this Spirit and Mage build. In the mid game, your board will look something like this. What you've done is you've added your Tidehunter, who's incredibly tanky at 4,000 health and 10 armor. That's roughly double the amount of health that Earth Spirit has, so you want him to be in the more kind of vulnerable position here. What you're also doing is you're using his Ravage ability to stun that enemy front line and set them up for your Delta Slam. It's also important to note that Ravage, believe it or not, is a magical based ability, which is going to benefit from the damage increase of the mage bonus. Now, when you find your Keeper of the Light, you're going to be removing Razor for Keeper. That helps to maintain your mage bonus. You're going to be putting Keeper roughly on the opposite end of Keeper the Light. Now, if you're in a situation where you're against a lot of pudges, you might actually want to do something like this, where you put a Morphling or a Storm Spirit in that position, because if Morphling gets pulled, he's just going to jump and kind of waveform away anyway. But let's assume that we don't have that issue right now, as Vigilance has recently been nerfed, so Pudge is not being used as commonly as a kind of tie-in with Heartless. Regardless, though, that's the position should be like this, and Void Spirit's off the back a little bit, simply so that he can approach and then not get focused fire. He doesn't have the armor that Earth Spirit does, so you want him to survive. He's often one of the last units to go down on the board because of his magical ability. He dissimulate. He tends to kind of bounce around the board a bit and has a lot of survivability. Overall, a very good setup here in the mid game. What's key though is that you need to ensure that you are leveling as aggressively as possible. Throughout the early and mid game, you need to be focusing on leveling. This build has a focus on tier 4 units, and that is kind of its primary weakness. You need to ensure that you are leveling as aggressively as you can, because you need to be pulling, the Tide Hunters, the Void Spirits, and the Keeper of the Light. That's a reliance of 3 tier 4 units. That's a lot. So you have to level up, because you need to increase the opportunity chances of the tier 4 units. So leveling is extremely important as you move into the late game. Now, moving into the late game, the 19 units you're adding is Disruptor. If you're looking to go to level 10 and you get to level 10, there are a few units that you can add. Namely, you can add like another Void Spirit, or another Storm Spirit, or even another Ember Spirit. Whoever your strongest spirit might be, it'll help with the additional Delta Slams. However, you could also add a Troll Warlord. He will complete the Warrior bonus and give your front line a little more tankability, which is great because you have some squishy units back here that need to be protected. And the longer that Tide Hunter and Earth Spirit, specifically Earth Spirit, because if he can get multiple geomagnetic grip casts off, he's going to Delta Slam more than once and be providing that silence. So a very good unit to help survive with the additional armor if you get to 10 though, but this build is generally complete at 9. So now you're adding Disruptor in, who's fantastic for silencing, because mages are becoming increasingly more common, mages and spirits, because this is a fantastically well balanced build. You can even transition to 6 mages with a build like this eventually if you get the RNG for it. But realistically, this is the complete build. But let's talk about some items here. There's a few key items that you can look for. Voidstone. Voidstone's great for, in the early game for someone like Ember Spirit who can't, generate enough mana. This helps him to cast in line with other units. You can also put the Voidstone on someone like the Void Spirit to ensure that he's casting early in line with the Earth Spirit or the Storm Spirit as well. If you notice that you're not getting enough Delta Slams, the Voidstone can help to kind of mitigate that by getting whoever's not getting their cast off in time the mana that they need. Otherwise, it can be generally used on someone like Shadow Fiend at the end of the game, so he can just get a nice early cast. Coccia is fantastic. It's fantastic on a unit like, the Keeper of the Light, who can be one of your primary DPSs. The disadvantage to this, though, is without the Human Alliance, he's going to be generating mana very, very slowly, so it might not be a good choice for Keeper. In fact, you might want to go a Yule's Scepter or a Sith of the Vise for the Keeper of the Light, because it's going to allow him to cast a little earlier in the fight, well, much earlier, actually. But Coccia is also a great option on someone like Shadow Fiend as well. It can also go on Morphling, who tends to cast very frequently with his waveform. If you get Morphling to level 3, his waveform does over 300 damage. That is a significant boost if you have a Coccia on him as well. The Arcane Boots are a great item. It's great for kind of putting on your units here in order to ensure that they get a very early cast of your spirits and get an early Delta Slam. Refresh Orb is fantastic on someone like Tide Hunter. It helps him to get 2 Ravages and help to kind of hold the enemy line kind of in place while you Delta Slam them. Otherwise, you could put Refresher Orb on someone like Disruptor if you're against mages. A very effective play. The Octarine is fantastic on pretty much anybody. I like it on Void Spirit. It's a great item for someone like Void Spirit. You can also put it in the late game on Earth Spirit, because the Geomagnetic Grip only has a cooldown of 8 seconds. At 5.6 with the with the Octarine, he very well likely will get 2 casts off before he goes down. So that is a great value for the Earth Spirit. If you can get 2 silencing Delta Slams, Perfect. Absolutely fantastic. Battle Fury is a borderline required item for Ember Spirit. His Sleight of Fist ability does physical damage based on his auto attack. So the result of that is he's going to cleave on his Sleight of Fist when he's doing it on the rear line. It's going to really increase the amount of damage potential he has. But overall, that's the way that I would use the items there. The Yule Scepter and the Sith of the Vise, they really help to generate mana on any unit that is not casting early enough. You want to pay attention to your board and see that, because if you want to get your Delta Slams off, which are absolutely key, you want to make sure that your spirits are casting at roughly the same time, and the Void Stone, the Yule Scepter, and the Sith of the Vise will help you do that. I hope this guide helps you guys. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to answer any that you may have. Thank you so much for watching, and a very heartfelt thank you to all of my wonderful subscribers. Take care, everyone, and I hope you have yourselves a wonderful day.